right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Bexley United Methodist. It's great to have you with us this morning. Let's go ahead and stand up and we'll sing our first song, Song in My Soul. There's a song in my soul, and I feel it stirring in me. This I know for sure, that your love is like a flood, and your mercy never ending. I give my song to you. And there's a joy in my soul, and it rises like the morning. This I know for sure, that your grace is enough, and your promise never breaking. I give my songs to you. All of your goodness is like a well running over. Oh, my soul, it sings for you. For all of your goodness, I will love you forever. Oh, my songs I sing for you. Yes, all my songs I sing for you. And there's a hope in my heart, it burning bright in the darkness. This I know for sure, that I will look upon your face, forever dwell in your presence, and always sing to you. All of your goodness is like a well running over. Oh, my soul, it sings for you. For all of your goodness, I will love you forever. All my songs I sing for you. Yes, all my songs I sing for you. And let my life be to you a symphony, singing out holy, oh, holy. And all my days, every single breath I breathe, singing out holy, oh, holy. And let my life be to you a symphony, singing out holy, oh, holy. And all my days, every single breath I breathe, singing out holy, you are holy. And all of your goodness is like a well running over. Oh, my soul, it sings for you. For all of your goodness, I will love you forever. And all my songs I sing for you. Yes, all my songs I sing for you. Yes, all my songs I sing for you.
So glad you're here this morning. I want to call to your attention. Next week, we have the blessing of the backpacks, the report on the youth mission trip and the BOLD conference that they attended this summer. And also, we're taking up Noisy Offering, which will be for Maui relief through UMCOR. Wanted to calendars for September 17th, the 24th, and August 1st, or October 1st. Those 3 weeks in a row, we are going to have joint worship, a whole church together, starting in the Maloney Center, then in the sanctuary the next week, but starting here on. And then we will have all church meals together. So just want to make sure that we're starting to get that in people's heads. Today was the first day we took breakfast. And why? Do you know? Okay. So that's a good segue. You may notice and they've started. This will be covered with cloth. If you look back there, walls, and then we'll start to have installation of some baffles and sound panels up in the roof. So we will get rid of the echo. And so thank you for being patient with all of that. Scott, did you have a...
Good morning, friends. Just a comment that I have is today we're starting up programming, and we are going to be doing a scavenger hunt on Main Street. We have about 20 different assignments for you to do, so it's going to be very awesome. So please make your way out to that. We're going to be meeting at the Starbucks on Main Street at 4 p.m. If you're planning on participating, try to get there early so we can divide you into teams and give you some instructions before we send you on your way for some fun adventures throughout our city. So that's the only announcement I have today.
All right. Speaking of the meal for First English, I stopped by the church yesterday to pick up some music equipment, and I ran into Lynn Swisher, who was one of the people, organizing that. And I was like, "Hey, Lynn, what are you doing here?" And he was like, "I'm collecting food for the meal for tomorrow morning." And as he says this, he's sitting in a chair reading a book. And I was like, "Oh, is that what that looks like?" But in all seriousness, he was working hard, and I saw the guys this morning working hard, getting it all in their cars and driving out. So it's a nice little ministry that we do. All right, let's sing "We Fall Down." This next one is one I'm really excited to introduce. And it was it's a little bit funny because I thought it was a different song, and I was trying to find a recording to send to them for a different song called Tremble that Rachel sings. And so I stumbled across this one, and I was like, whoa, this one's great too. We should sing this. So. All right. I will tremble in no other name. My heart surrendered to no other reign. I will bow at no other throne, rest my heart at no other home. Let these hands lift no other crown, and let these knees fall on no other ground. Draw these eyes from the gold that won't shine. You turn this life from water into wine. Lord, I tremble, I tremble in your presence, in your presence. You take my breath with every starry night. You show your power in downtown city lights. You are taller than the highest of hills, and stronger than the walls we tried to build. You blind me with the beauty of your face, and draw me close with your divine embrace. Speak to me with healing in your words, and fix the things I didn't know were. Lord, I tremble, I tremble in your presence, in your presence. Lord, I tremble, I tremble in your presence, in your presence. My Lord, 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 my Lord. To you alone be praised. Oh, who could take the place of, oh, what compares to your love? For everything that you've done, to you alone be praised. Whoa, who could take the place of, and what compares to your love? For everything that you've done, to you alone be praised. You invented all of time and space, called the morning at midnight into place, and made the mountains and tamed the wildest seas. And still you set your holy eyes on me, and I will always live in wonder of the fact that I awake your jealous love. Eternity will almost be enough. Eternity will almost be enough. Lord, I tremble in your presence, in your presence. Lord, I tremble in your presence, in your presence. Oh, I will always live in wonder of the fact that I awake your jealous love. Eternity will almost be enough. Eternity will almost be enough. Well, I will always live in wonder of the fact that I awake your jealous love. Eternity will almost be enough. Eternity will almost be enough. Said I tremble in your presence, in your presence.
At this time, will the children come down for our children's moment? Just let the music be your guide. All right. Wonderful. Oh, we got Sammy and David moving on down. All right, friends. So, I have a question for you. We've learned this in Vacation Bible School. I've heard it repeated numerous times during our children's moment. How many of you guys know what the Great Commandment is? The Great Commandment. Anybody? All right. Well, here's what we're going to hear. Here's what we'll say. Ready? What was that? Yes, I'm Elizabeth's dad, but that's not the Great Commandment. So the Great Commandment goes, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And today I want to talk about the part of loving the Lord your God with all your mind. How many of you know that our thoughts always control our actions? Did you know that? Like you just raising your hand right now, there's a signal that went from your brain to your hand that made it do this. And there's something going on in your brain that's making you boogie down, Peter. That's okay, I do the same thing too. But cool things about our minds is how when we love the it up with a lot of blessings and good things so that we can love everybody and think good of everyone else. Think about it. If you have good thoughts of your brother or sister, you're more kind to them. And if you're having those negative thoughts about your brother and sister, you're probably grumbling and complaining about them. You didn't need to admit that loud, Peter. But anyway, so what I would like to challenge as we start the new school year and as you're going around and making new friends and seeing the friends you've already established, always try to come in with a very good mindset of just loving people and thinking good of everybody, and you'll just see how much you're able just to pour out the love of Jesus Christ to everybody that you meet. So we're going to go ahead and put our hands together, and we're going to close our eyes and bow our heads. Let us pray. Dear God, we thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ. And Lord, renew our minds so that we can love everybody the way you love us. In your name we pray, amen. All right, friends, let's get up and go.
Greet each other in the name of Jesus. Hello.
once in a while, not too often.
Well, that's good. Those are tough.
She's still at least was well left.
Yeah, good. Yeah, you don't want to be
Two.
around sunlight.
No, she'll be fine. We got grandkids coming tonight. She'll be ready.
Oh, good.
Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2.
Hey, Eric, how are you?
How are you? Good to see you.
Ages.
How's your wonderful wife?
She's great. She's a little under the weather this morning, so she's doing great. Thank you. Yeah. I just told Kylie she'll be yeah, before grandkids go for dinner tonight. She'll be fine by then.
Let her know that there was a resignation of Bexley School. Yeah, Marvin Jay, husband is in the Navy, and he got posted to Italy, so they did resign. But I got a couple emails from two board members wondering if I would be
Lord be with
But I
you.
recommend it.
No, that'd be great for you.
Well, we'll see what happens. Anyway, just share that with me.
Yeah, I will.
It's good to see you.
The Lord be with you. By the way, I really like that Tremble song. I like it really well. The reason we weren't singing with you was because I think they had the Tremble words to the other version. And so we didn't have anything to sing. We chilled and enjoyed it. Next time. Are there joys and concerns you'd like to share? Yeah.
It's a concern, but I don't know that there's any hope for it now. It's past, but it may be for my mother-in-law. We waited over a year for her to get at least 60
Oh.
So, future ones, if she goes and reapplies, she'll have that denied on her record. And it's denied because they say, oh, he's her only son, so she's probably not going to stay. You know, and that's, so I don't know how that will be overcome.
Yeah.
But maybe, so prayers for like future ability to
Yeah.
be seen as not just trying to come over here and illegally stay, but she just wants to come and visit.
Yeah. What's your mother-in-law's name?
Sylvia.
For Sylvia to be able to come and visit her son. Lord, hear our prayers. It's good to be in the house of the Lord. Lord, hear our prayers. Thanksgiving. Yeah. On Wednesday? Happy birthday upcoming to you guys. That's wonderful. Oh my gosh, 3 birthdays in 1 week. The Lord be with you. So for birthdays for Jovi and Bryn and for Rachel, their wonderful lives. Lord, hear our prayers. Kim? For college students just starting and for all their parents, Lord, hear our prayers. Cheryl, this is your first Sunday back for quite a while. I always thought all that jumping she did on concrete floors was probably not good for the hips. We're really, really glad you're back.
They told people not to go down campus because kids are moving back in.
Right, right. Other prayer concerns? Yeah.
So my principal, I should have brought this up last week, but we have a new principal in my middle school building at Tate's Valley. He's been in our building before, but the week before school started, he was on the ladder, out on the porch, fell off, broke his pelvis in 5 places,
Oh my
severe
gosh.
concussion, broke some ribs, he looks like
what dedication from him and from so many of our teachers and staff. So what's his first name? For Greg's healing and for his inspiring work as a principal. Lord, hear our prayers. Okay, today I want to give the microphone to Sharon Seckel, who's been on a mission trip and is going to tell us about that. Oh, there you are. This is good. Okay. Great.
Good morning. Last week, many of you heard Michael Dion speak about her mission trip to El Salvador, and Michael was working physically very hard. This mission trip is a little bit different, and I'll tell you about how they merge and how they're different. So to begin with, you can see on the slide, this trip was sponsored by the Florida Conference of the United Methodist Church and the Cypress Lake United Methodist Church, both in Florida. So how did that happen? Well, Craig and I, most of you know, are snowbirds, and our very first year in Fort Myers, we knew we had to find a church. We visited several churches, and one afternoon we saw a little ad, tiny ad, about a church that was relatively close to us. We went there, I would say 30 minutes in, we knew that that was the church. We've never seen that ad again. We became very involved in that church over the years that we were there before Hurricane Ian struck. And I became part of the global missions team. They support missions in Cuba, El Salvador, and Kenya. So that's how this came about. So in Cuba, there are about 400 United Methodist churches and about 800 United Methodist mission churches. We were mostly in the mission churches. So just a visual so you can kind of, I know we all know where Cuba is, but I don't think we look at it particularly often. But it's just a reminder of how close we are. Havana's 90 miles from Key West, and I understand that if it's a clear day, if you're standing in Key West or if you're standing in Havana, you can see the other country, land. That's kind of amazing. So on this trip, for 2 days, we visited churches just outside of Havana. The first day, we went off to the east where you can see the red line there, a little easier travel, so we went farther out, and it was a long day. The second day, we went to the west where you can see the yellow circle and visited churches not quite as distant apart, but just like we would see in the city of Columbus, the east side and the west side are not the same. So mission trips from the United States resumed in 2022 after COVID, just like everyone else. Cuba was closed during COVID, and our purpose was to just make contact with the churches in Cuba, letting them know that we're still here and supporting them as needed with whatever resources we had brought with us on this trip. So we spent most of our time on day one visiting house churches. Now, some of us that grew up in certain denominations probably know what house churches are, but it's just what it sounds like. You're having church in someone's house or on their carport. In this picture on the right, we were on someone's carport, and it was very hot, and we were running late, but they were still all there, excited to see us. In the middle photo, one of the local women from that church was speaking with two of our team members, Jenny and Vic, trying to get help with some medication issues that she had, and we tried to connect her with the right people. But mostly what we were doing was providing encouragement and some financial support while we were there. So we continue on. Let's start with the bottom picture. I know we all like the cars in Cuba, and we like to hear about that, but this is typical Cuba travel. Fuel is very expensive, and most people are traveling on dirt roads. We were, in a van, and we had an interpreter, but it's not what you think. This was a holiday, so it was very busy, and we had to stop a lot for cattle and things to cross the road. So again, still local churches, and you can see even the two that I am showing there are very different. Again, we were assessing needs and providing support as we could, either emotional support or some physical support or financial support. So the churches that we visited, as you saw in the first picture, they were full. They were really excited to see us, and it was a full day for us. The church building you see on the right where I'm standing is in Cardenas, where the district superintendent attends. They fed us lunch, and we came back after all of our other travel, and they fed us dinner. Mostly the same thing. This is typical Cuban meals. We had beans and rice with a little bit of chicken, a lot of local fruit. We were fed very, very, very well. And they were very welcoming, even though it was a long day, I'm sure, for them as well. Again, in the top photo, you can see that travel is a challenge. So you see a lot of horse and buggies, you see a lot of bicycles, you see a lot of mopeds, not as many vehicles. So our first night out, this was when we were coming back home. The sun was setting over the Straits of Florida. So it was a long day, but we left with full stomachs and full hearts. The second day, we started out at a big church in Havana at a youth rally. Very, very energetic youth rally. They were excited to be together. They were rocking with music like our teens would be using. I don't know if it was the same song because I don't speak Spanish, but very much like what we would see here and very similar to what we just saw, some of us, at the youth rally in Daytona, which you'll hear about next week. On the right, you see Reverend Tom Schaefer. Tom was our pastor at Cypress Lake United Methodist for most of the time we were there. He's now retired, but he has a relationship with Cuba, and I'll talk about that in a couple minutes. So as we entered another church, as you look at the top left of the church, it's kind of a small picture, so you probably can't see. But between the last two people coming in, there are boards laying across the floor. And there was an open cistern in that church, and that church was actually having services there and was growing, and there were children attending. So, in fact, they came riding in on a moped. But this church, again, is already meeting. It has a lot of people there, and we gave funds on the spot to get that taken care of so that no one was hurt. And that's one of the reasons that we were there. In the center, you see two other house churches, again, both different, but both similar. Some had church on the carport, one in the middle. They were having church actually in their living room, all trying to grow the Methodist Church in Cuba. And yet another house visit, similar to the others, and a similar lunch, but in this particular case, we ate outside, so you can kind of see what the housing looks like. The bottom picture, this was the district superintendent's home, and we were eating there, and that was just his little outside area. And what we talked about at those lunches with the pastors and with the district superintendents were specific ways that we could support their churches and their districts. And this is one of my favorite places that we went. This pastor had that smile on his face the entire time we were there, just like that. He was so happy, and I feel like it's probably because he didn't know what we were saying, but that's okay. And his wife was lovely, and they also were ready and having church in their home already. On the right is Tylene, our interpreter. We would not have been able to do anything without her. She is in her last year of seminary, and she was studying for her finals, and she was out with us every day for the entire week, on the bus and out to dinner and wherever we were, interpreting everything that was going on. So we would have been lost without her there to help us. On the right, we were outside while some negotiations were going on inside at this church, and this little girl was fascinated with my little bag. And there was a little latch on it that she spent probably 10 minutes trying to open. When she finally got it open, she was so exciting, and I don't even remember what was in there, maybe a sticker, maybe a quarter or something, but she was thrilled and successful, and you can see from most of the pictures, even with so little, they're so happy and smiles on everyone's faces. So this is a church that Pastor Tom, again, our leader, his parents were missionaries here back in the 50s and early 60s until they had to leave in 1961. And he had a boyhood friend there, and that person came to church Sunday to hear his message and hang out. And Tom did give the message. You won't see any pictures of that because we were all trying not to cry. It was very emotional. And we were engrossed in his sermon, and what a wonderful legacy that they left for that church. On the right is the pastor of the church, Pastor Cruz. I suspect that within the next year or two, he will be the next district superintendent or bishop in that particular area. So when we got to this church on Sunday, we got there in the middle of the early service, so it would be like this service, and the youth team was singing and dancing, and it was just energizing, and the building was full. Maybe full because they knew we were coming, but I don't know that they thought we were coming at that service. So we really enjoyed that. Again, we didn't understand much of it, but there was definitely energy and praise going on. We took a little break in the pastor's home, and then we had another meal in a different place at this pastor's home. So I forgot to click that one. So we were fed very well with beautiful views pretty much everywhere we went. So on Monday, we switched our focus. We were no longer going out to house churches. The other thing that we support in the Florida Conference is the seminary that's in Havana. So we spent the day here, and everything you see in these 4 pictures are things that Cypress Lake's global mission team has supplied for that church. Last mission trip, they were there before COVID. They built all the bunk beds and made sure they were sturdy. The ones they had previously were a little bit literally shaky, and they're still standing strong after several years, so we're happy about that. So this time, we were assessing the technology needs because they're also 4 to 6 years old, and just like we know, that can't happen. So that will probably happen on our next mission trip. The goal is to become more like we are here, more virtual and more using technology so we don't have to have as many piles of paper as you see in that photo, and we don't have to use as much toner and ink and copy material. So that's the plan for the next mission, which will probably be in November. And that also allows the seminary students to not have to travel into Havana so frequently, because again, that is difficult. So while we were at the seminary on the left side of the screen, we met with the professors to get their take on what they needed. We don't want to supply things that aren't what they really need, and they were happy to share that with us. We had lunch with them, similar style lunch, but in a different place with a lot of different people and sharing ideas with the professors there at the seminary. On the right side of the screen is the new satellite seminary campus outside of the city of Havana, and the gentleman standing in the center is the bishop at that church. The bottom is Pastor Tom speaking to a group at the seminary. I don't even remember what the class was, but giving them, again, encouragement for that. And at the bottom, you can see me with the young man taking our picture. Earlier in the day, when we were eating lunch, he was there and he had on a t-shirt that I don't remember if it said Ohio or Ohio State. So I went over and chatted with him and asked if he was from Ohio. He was. Long story short, he went to high school in Pickerington back in the day when it was really small, and I taught high school in Canal, Winchester, back in the day when it was really small, and we had mutual friends. So here's your lesson. You never know who you're going to meet, as our moms told us. Always be on your best behavior. I think I was. All right, so what you see here are the medications that they had asked us to supply when we came over from the United States. So on the left and on the right top are prescription medications that the Global Missions Team ordered from Blessings Without Borders, was what they had specifically asked. But since I wasn't in Fort Myers or Florida at all at the time, they asked us to bring over-the-counter medications specifically for children, and we shared that, and many of you brought things in. So on the bottom is one suitcase of mine that we took The other suitcase, the big Vera Bradley bag, you women will know what I'm talking about, was also full of over-the-counter medications for children. And the doctor in the middle with Tom was overwhelmed at what we brought. He had no idea it was coming, so he was overwhelmed at that. And on the right, there's a little stack of children's books in Spanish, and there were a couple of teachers at Bexley High School who knew I was doing this trip, and they supplied those for us to take also. And those went to, we just asked Tom to decide where it should go to, the church he had pastored or somewhere else that was needed. So thank you very much from all the groups in Havana and beyond Havana in Cuba for helping supply those things that they needed. And I do understand that we can't talk about Cuba without talking about cars. So there they are. These were cars that we saw while we were out visiting. The one at the top looks like it's the Barbie car. Anybody else think that when they saw it? But again, the cars are not the most common thing there. It's more likely what you see in the upper corner, there's a car, but there's also a horse and buggy, and in the lower left, there's a moped, lots of mopeds. And if the picture was bigger, you could see that the woman on the back is reaching around the driver, and she's holding a floor lamp to go wherever they're going. Yeah. So it was, different and fun all at the same time. So what did I take from this mission? The Methodists, we like to say, share God's love here, there, and everywhere. They say that a lot in Florida. I'm not sure we say it quite as much here, but they say it all the time at Cypress Lake. So secondly, God doesn't expect us just to show up. I'm glad we're here and I'm glad we're showing up, but there's work to be done, and God kind of expects us to do that. In fact, in Micah it says, "What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God." And that's plenty, but to do that, we sometimes have to do some action, other action involved with that. So Matthew also says, "Whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me." So what is God calling you? What is he kind of annoying you with, what he wants you to do? Is he asking for more effort? Is he asking for more dedication? Is he asking for more time? Most of you that have known us for a while know that our kids were involved in sports, and you would particularly know Tyler. We did a lot of baseball in elementary, middle, and high school, a lot of baseball. And this song was playing all the time. If you have student athletes, put me in, coach. I'm ready to play today. And then a little bit later it says, "I can be center field." Well, if you know baseball, center field's kind of the important position. You don't have to play center field. You can be the bat boy. You can be the pitcher. You can be whatever you feel like you can do, but you can be something. Thank you.
I can't think of anybody better to go on that kind of mission trip, which is about building relationships, isn't it? And listening. You can't have ongoing work with another congregation, any place, unless you build relationships. And that is such an important part. So thank you. Let's pray. Dear God, we thank you for laying on our hearts your calling. We thank you for having a heart for the whole world and all the people in it. And we thank you for the witnesses that go and show us about how joyful it is to share your love here, there, and everywhere. And we ask that you would put on us the mind of Christ, who taught us to pray, saying, "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. So we're in the story of the matriarchs and patriarchs, and particularly Joseph, who has, in this story, made the big transition to be reunited with his brothers. Joseph had been sold into slavery. While he was in slavery, he was appointed as a captain to a captain in Pharaoh's army, and he rose to a position of trust in the household, and so he kind of had a pretty good break at that point. But while he was in that position of trust, he was falsely accused of sexual assault by the captain's wife. And then he was thrown into prison, where he stayed for several years. While he was in prison, his ability to interpret dreams became known because some other prisoners shared dreams with him that he kind of interpreted the spiritual meaning of them. And those interpretations were borne out by subsequent experience. So some people remembered that he had a gift of interpretation of dreams. When Pharaoh had some very unusual dreams, Joseph was called upon to interpret. And it was in that role as an interpreter of Pharaoh's dreams that he became a head administrator in Egypt. So Joseph's time as an administrator in Egypt was for the purpose of administering a program of storing grain during 7 years of great agricultural production, so that they would have it when 7 years of famine hit Egypt, and not only Egypt, but all the surrounding areas. So Joseph was in charge, basically, as kind of like an emergency management person, and had incredible authority in Egypt. His brothers, living in the land north of Egypt, also experienced famine, and their father sent them down to go and investigate the source of grain that he'd heard about in Egypt. And Joseph recognizes them. They don't recognize him because it's been 20 years since they sold him into slavery. And this is what happens in chapter 45. Now, I just want to tell you, if you want to read a novel, just go to Genesis and read the story of Jacob and his 12 sons. Because I can't begin to capture the detail, but it's really fascinating. But here we go in chapter 45. His brothers are there before him. Joseph could no longer control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Send everyone away from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, so dismayed were they at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me." And they came closer. He said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or be angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me here before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. You shall settle in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, as well as your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. I will provide for you there, since there are 5 more years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have will not come to poverty. And now your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see that it is my own mouth that speaks to you. You must tell my father how greatly I'm honored in Egypt and all that you have seen. Hurry and bring my father down here.' And then he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, while Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. And after that, his brothers talked with him." So Joseph recognized his brothers. Before we get to this part, he spends a bit of time working on their behalf anonymously. He doesn't let them know who he is right away. In fact, the first time they come to him for grain, he kind of sets up a test for them to find out what character they have. He gives them instructions to bring back, if they come back to see him, that they must bring with him the one brother that did not make the trek, who was his biological full brother. Many of the others were half-brothers. But he wants to see his brother and asks them to bring him back with them. And that happens. And that second time that he takes care of them and sees his brother, he also sends them out with a test. He puts a cup, a silver cup from his household in their bag to find out if they're honest and if they'll tell him about it. And in the meantime, he's listening and asking them questions about their father, and he finds out that they actually have acknowledged that their father has really been suffering because of the loss of their son, and that they're concerned for him. So Joseph is using some of the intermittent years while he's working with them to provide for their needs to kind of find out about what kind of people they've become and to test them out. Then when the stranger, who has been their benefactor and is such a powerful person in this place, reveals his identity to his brothers, they are scared, right? All of a sudden they realize that they are in the hands of and at the mercy and indebted to a person they had gravely wronged by selling him into slavery. A person they had essentially robbed of relationship with their father and with their family. Sorry, Kyle, I shouldn't move. 15, 20 years ago. You know, they say that time heals all wounds, but I can tell you that I've seen people for whom time does not remove wounds. They hold on to them, they nurse them, they recall them almost like anniversary memories, and it can warp a person's personality. Joseph, 20 years, had given him a lot of life experience. He had experienced, in the midst of this roller coaster of ups and downs in his life, he'd actually gotten to the point where he saw just a glimpse of the fact that God had been with him and had been using those circumstances all along for good. And not even primarily for his good, but for the good of others, and not just his family, but for the people of Egypt, and actually people from all around the known world came to receive the benefit of Joseph's foreknowledge and of his planning of Egypt's abundance. And so Joseph had a bit of assurance that God had not abandoned him during that time. Joseph has started to get a little bit more of God's heart into his heart. And so this story is a beautiful story of forgiveness and of reconciliation. Now, Joseph doesn't out and out say, I forgive you. He actually makes it even simpler than that. Don't be hard on yourselves. Don't be dismayed. What you did, God used for good. God sent me before you to preserve life. You sold me, but God sent me to preserve life. Later on, after her father dies, the brothers again are insecure about their relationship with Joseph because they think maybe he's just been nice to us because our father would want it that way. And then he says to them even more powerfully this line in Genesis 50:20. Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good. Every now and then I run into Christians who think that God is a nice, loving, good, and forgiving God in the New Testament, but in the Old Testament, God is kind of angry and vengeful. And God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. We may understand God differently, but in the Old Testament scriptures, God is revealed in this story. Christians tend to think that Jesus died for our sins, yes, and that's a sign of God's generous, gracious nature. Jesus prayed, Father, forgive them from the cross. Jesus taught Peter not to count the number of times we need to forgive others. We see in Jesus that forgiveness is right at God's heart, but we also see in Joseph's story that forgiveness and reconciliation goes right to the heart of God's plan. Christians, because this cross we put on the altar reminds us that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. We are all beneficiaries of forgiveness and reconciliation, and so we are then also entrusted as stewards of forgiveness and reconciliation. Joseph didn't deserve what he got from his brothers. He had been arrogant as a young man when he talked about the dreams where he had superiority and domination over his brothers. By the time they came into his presence once more, he had realized that the way he told that story was completely different. It wasn't about him at all as one who was superior. It was about God who was using him to save and serve others. Joseph could have been really bitter about what he lost in those years. He was convicted unjustly of a crime he did not commit. He experienced having the complete loss of freedom and years of being removed from his family's life. I'm sure he was worried about his father and his brothers with whom he was so close. In the midst of those years, I'm pretty sure the world did not look to him as if God was directing or present in those events. But God, by God's grace, Joseph had a glimpse towards the end of the story that God had indeed been with him all along, and not just with him to care for him, but to use him to care for so many others. And in fact, to use him and his family in a way that fulfilled the original promise to his first ancestor, Abraham, that they would be blessed to be a blessing to all the families of the earth through feeding so many. Now for us, I guess the message is in part that God does not always show God's hand easily. If God were always just showing what God's up to in this big picture scenario, we would probably take God for granted as something we could control or manipulate. But God sometimes lets us see that we are not alone. If you are in a situation where you cannot see what God good could be doing, remember that this God who is at work in this situation is the same one through Christ who said that there's not even a hair on your head that goes unnoticed by God. There's not a sparrow, as common of a bird as they are, whose presence is not known and valued by God. That God's concern is for the well-being of all, and that we are not alone as we attempt to move and prosper in this life. And with that gracious presence of God, we might also be people who try to see and make that grace known in our relationships with others, with forgiveness, and maybe even with reconciliation. Reconciliation is a little riskier than forgiveness in some ways because it means restoring a relationship. And that is not always possible and not always a great idea. Joseph was careful about it. He was testing out the character of those whom he was forgiving, but then also trying to reconcile with. And we also ought to be careful in the way we restore relationships and make attempts to do that. But we are to be instruments of God's grace and to know that no matter what circumstance in life we are in, on the way up to the top through the roller coaster or down in that valley where it's scary, God does not leave us alone either, and wishes and longs for our well-being and our prosperity, and for us to be instruments of his goodness to others. And may it be so. Amen.
and all the world will praise your great Jesus. Worthy is the Lamb that was slain for us, the Son of God and man. You are high and lifted up, and all the world will praise your great name. Your great name,
Your great name.
Scott. Bottom